Hello there. I hope you're doing well. And I said I wouldn't do it again, and I did it again. It's been a month since I laid down the last episode. So if you've been following along, my apologies for that. Yeah, I have no excuse. It went through my mind a gazillion times to do it, and I wasn't feeling lined up with it. And so I just kept letting the days go by, but I'm really glad to be here today. Interestingly, I tried to record this the other day and lost all the audio, so there you go. My name is Sarah, and if you're new to this, then I'll just take a moment to tell you what I'm doing here. So this is episode 54, and I've been reading a really wonderful book, to my view, and this is On the Path, an anthology on the Noble Eightfold Path drawn from the Pāli Canon. And this book was written by Ṭhānissaro Bhikkhu, who is an American Buddhist monk, and he is widely respected for his translations of Buddhist texts and his teachings on meditation and the Dhamma. And his works are deeply rooted in the Theravāda Buddhist tradition, emphasizing a direct, practical approach to the Buddhist teachings. And as I always like to say at the beginning, I also want to thank Ṭhānissaro Bhikkhu for putting his book in the Creative Commons. So if you expand out the description of this video, you'll see a link to the book, and you can download it for yourself and read it, follow along if you'd like. What I'm doing here is I'm reading it, and there's lots and lots of commentary. I on occasion cuss and cuss hard, and I talk about very serious things. So brace yourself. If you're expecting a, kind of feel-good, kumbaya Buddhist experience here, definitely not what's going on here, but you are certainly welcome. And if you are here, thank you for being here and thank you for listening. So I'm going to pick it up where we left off. And we have, I've been in chapter, I believe it's 5 now for a couple of episodes. Prior to that, Ṭhānissaro Bhikkhu has been breaking up the 8 so far of the Noble Eightfold Path, the 8 quote-unquote rights, 1 per chapter. But here in chapter 5, he combined 2. And if you've been following along, then you can hear my commentary as to why I believe he did that. And so we're still in right speech and right action coupled together. And on page 286, if you do have the book, the digital book, let's get into it. The values flowing from this perspective are particularly difficult to remember in times of verbal and physical conflict, which is why Right View offers specific advice on how to maintain right action and right speech in such situations. And if you want to know what situations, we could maybe, last episode. In terms of action, it reminds you that victory over your own defilements is greater than victory over 1,000 others. And that comes from Sutta 185. Even if you are in a relative position of strength over your enemy, it's best to show restraint. Sutta 186. Which means that it's better to lose a battle if winning it entails engaging in wrong action. The Vinaya gives a specific example of this principle in allowing monks to strike back in self-defense when attacked, but not to do so with the intent to kill. And that is from PC 74. And once I get done reading this passage, I'll get into my commentary and then I'll talk about what the PC stands for. In terms of verbal conflict, the Buddha encourages the monks not to get involved in useless debates, but his own behavior shows that under certain conditions, debates can actually be helpful. This is why Sutta 176 sets the conditions for which kinds of people are worth engaging in discussion. The conditions come down to 2 sorts. Oh, get ready for it. I love this. The other person, A, should know proper procedure in how to engage in a reasonable debate, and B, should have the integrity to conduct the debate in a fair manner. These conditions, of course, reflect back on you. If you're going to engage in a debate, you have to meet these conditions as well. If either side lacks the requisite conditions, it's better to walk away from the debate, even if other people regard that as a defeat. As Sutta 176 points out, the purpose of discussion should be to lead to the mind's liberation. A discussion that does not serve that purpose is best avoided. I'm going to stop right there. I have so much to say about this. So if you are new also, I want to very transparently say that I do use AI to assist me with this. I know there's a lot of different views out there about AI. Oh, I assure you I have my own. So there you go. That's important to know. So I want to speak to this here, and per the usual, I always ask AI to penetrate. So I asked AI to help me unpack this and to talk to, I do this a lot with AI, to talk to me like I'm 5, so that I can really make sure that I really understand it, and then that'll help me to connect it to how I work with these ideas in my own life. Anybody who knows me personally knows that I am a very passionate person. I'm just a hot-blooded person. I'm very hot-blooded. I've come a long way, baby. No, I have a practice, but and I don't pathologize that in myself. I used to, but yeah, I don't really do that anymore. And I'm leading with this because there's a nuance here, especially if you read the last chapter or you listened to the last episode. There's a lot of nuance for the Buddha in relationship to conflict, verbal conflict, right speech, physical conflict, right action. So for some listeners, you perhaps may not identify with any of that. Perhaps you don't have that kind of mind. If you do have a mind like my mind, then this might be particularly salient to you. And I can say that it's not just Buddhism, but it's actually also many, 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 many years in a program called Al-Anon. So it's really both of those practices that overlap in this regard in relationship to knowing when to walk away. At Kenny Rogers, knowing when to run. But we don't run, right? Just knowing when to walk away. The Buddha is really clear here in the sutta. If the dialogue, if the argument, if the disagreement, if the discussion isn't leading to the mind's liberation, stop talking. And this can be really hard, I think, as well, a hard pill to swallow. But again, it comes back to the teachings. If you practice, and you practice attention, then what happens is you begin to notice perhaps your own behavior becomes a little bit more apparent to one who practices. So you'll be more alert to your Shempa points, the things that might be triggering anger, triggering contempt, triggering disgust, triggering a defensiveness, triggering. And as soon as we slip into that, we're in dangerous territory. And so the Buddha, gives, really there's 2 paths to take here. He suggests, either you can notice this and, well, he didn't say this. I'm just going to, let me just tell you how I do this. First of all, am I playing by Buddha's rules? Again, you don't have to follow him. Look, was just a path that worked for him. And then he went around teaching it. That's it. If you don't like it, don't follow it. So oftentimes I just won't even get into conversations with people. If I can tell or feel that this is just not going to be productive, this is not going to be in the service of liberating our minds and freeing our minds from attachments and, clingings and identifications and clingings, and then it's better to walk away. And it's funny, as I was reading this, I was thinking, well, damn, dude, that was my whole last job. So I was a teacher. I taught community college for, like a really long time, like almost 20 years, at one institution for almost 15 of those. And I left that job, and it was all one big kind of decision and pain point and all the rest of it. It was my Buddhist response that I probably put off for too long. But it did come from my practice, which is that I began to see that I was becoming a poor discusser, if you will. And I was also in a climate where there were lots of people like that. And we seemed to keep feeding on each other. It was just like this weird, I don't know. And alas, sadly, I don't know. I couldn't seem to find a way out of it for myself. And so I did what I knew would work in terms of coming back home to what I committed to, which is just to walk away, you know? Was I in the wrong for part of it? Was I also not in the wrong for part of it? And it doesn't matter. You know, that's kind of, I think, you know, we're talking about confrontation here. Just walk away. Just walk away. Nobody has to be right. Nobody has to be wrong. Nobody has to be a victim. Nobody has to be an oppressor in Buddhism. Just walk away. I had this really interesting conversation with Robot about kind of like a Buddhist arguing with a Marxist to see like what the conversation would look like. And there's so many aspects of Marxism that I think, you know, Marx got right about the social role in human behavior and the role that it irrefutably plays. But there, you know, there's a huge departure between Marx and Buddha. And I choose Buddha because I don't like giving other people power and control over my experience of reality. Do I recognize that there are lots of things that I have no control over because of that dynamic? Of course, which makes me double down even more on my Buddhism. In other words, which makes me double down even more in this idea of considering and protecting the sense gates to the best of my ability. So that's what I do. And I think nipping it in the bud is really important, you know, especially if you too are a more kind of hot-blooded fighter like myself. Nipping it in the bud is really, really great. And I'm not a big fan of regret, you know, and I won't go into, you know, number one, try not to do things that you'll regret, which I've tried not to. The things that I've done that I do I do feel regret. I don't like the word regret. Have I done things in my life that have caused harm? Absolutely. Absolutely. Whether it was intentional, unintentional. Have I ever caused harm intentionally? In self-defense, absolutely I have. But I think that's it. I'm pretty sure that's it. Which is why I'm not a big fan of regret. But at the same time, if someone were to say to me, hey, if you could do something differently in relationship to your last, what started as right livelihood and became wrong livelihood for me, you know, what would you do differently? And I would immediately just say, I would have walked away a lot earlier. You know, I would have nipped it in the bud. Because I didn't nip it in the bud, the people around me started to pay the price for my discontent. And that's because I didn't walk away. Yeah. And that's the real practical, that's one of the many, 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 many things I love about Buddhism is how practical it is. It's really, really practical. You know, I can read this right now, over 25 years later, after discovering this particular approach to living, and still just go, wow, gosh darn, this is amazing. This is exactly how it works. And this is exactly what happens when I, let me reread this for you. If you're going to engage in a debate, you have to meet these conditions as well. And if you find that it's becoming untenable to meet those conditions, that is definitely really good information for you, I would say. And I realize that I'm speaking from a place of privilege, and I'm not a big fan of the word privilege. We can easily slip into victimizing behavior when we start using words like that. You know, it can very nefariously slip in there and start making us feel like we're put upon by life. Everybody's put upon by life. Life is suffering. I know people don't like that, and they also misinterpret it, misunderstand what it means in Buddhism. But if you do understand what the Buddha meant by suffering, then all of us are put upon by life. So we can just kind of let all of that go right off the bat. And I would say too that we can't really look at somebody else's outsides and presume to know anything about how much or how little they're put upon by life. All that I can do is note my behavior, note my heart space, note whether or not it's opening or closing, note whether or not I want to choke this person out or not. If I'm feeling aggression rising in my body, I walk away, just immediately walk away. because I am a fuck around and find out kind of person. You know, I am not to be fucked with. So I put myself on timeout. I think it's healthy. I think it's a sign of a mature adult. That's how I feel about it, you know. I know plenty of people who would say, well, you must not be meditating right if you're still like that. I don't know what you're talking about. Like I said, I'm Buddhist, so I don't know what you're talking about. I'm going to get back to the reading. Let's do it. In addition to debates, verbal conflict can also take the form of accusations of misbehavior. Here again, the canon offers advice to both sides, the accuser and the accused, as to what qualities they should bring to the accusation if it is to serve as an aid to both sides. Liberation from defilement. And that comes from Sutta 177. Guidance for concentration and discernment. In addition to receiving guidance from the discernment factors of the path, right speech and right action also exercise qualities of mind that are conducive to developing the path factors that come under concentration and discernment. In terms of concentration, Sutta 202 mentions that following the principles of right speech and right action leads to lack of remorse, which in turn fosters two of the conditions needed for concentration. The first condition is mindfulness, the ability to keep something in mind. If you have nothing to regret in your words and deeds, you'll feel less need to block things from your memory. As a result, your mindfulness and thus your concentration will have fewer gaps. I find this really, really interesting, and I don't, you know, if you followed this podcast, there have been plenty of places and times where if I was sitting across from Siddhartha Gautama, we would have a debate. We would have a debate in the fashion that he just described would be a healthy debate. I don't even really know how to speak to this that would be short, because there's that word regret again. Regret is a very subjective experience. So if Buddha were to impose the word regret on you, he's already defiling his own claims. And again, this, to my view, goes back to the beginning of the reading today, you know, which is that there is a time and there is a place for disagreement. And I think if you're feeling regret, part of the practice, and this is particularly true, I find, for women who have kind of been enculturated to placate everyone around them. You know, they're socialized, they're domesticated really to, you know, smooth everything over. And that's great. You know, this is not, but some things shouldn't be smoothed. Right, Epstein? So, I'm going to keep on reading, but this is one of those places, and I always like to say it out loud when it happens, where I wish that I could meet the man and sit down with him and be like, yeah, but you're a dude. Let's talk about this a little bit more. I'm going to keep on going. Let's do it. The second condition is gladness. Lack of remorse promotes the skillful gladness that allows the mind to settle down with a steady sense of well-being. Once again, what I would say to him is it well-being that you're cultivating, or is it that you're numbing yourself out to condescend to being enculturated to placate, and you're in fact actually completely and solely and entirely disconnected from yourself as a autonomous being. I don't know if that makes sense. I hope so, but those are two very different things to me. And this is where he and I we wouldn't get into a fist fight, obviously, but I bet you it would get heated, and I wouldn't back down, and I bet you he wouldn't know what to do with that. Maybe he would. Maybe I'm not giving him enough credit. Although the suttas don't mention this point, the practice of right speech in particular makes you more and more sensitive to the verbal fabrications, directed thought, and evaluation. We haven't touched on that in a while, but let me repeat that for you. This is so key in Buddhism. It makes you more and more sensitive to the verbal fabrications. And in parentheses, so what does he mean by verbal fabrications? Directed thought and evaluation. Directed thought and evaluation produces fabrication that precedes speech. At the same time, giving you practice on how to control these fabrications so that your speech doesn't wander into ways that are wrong. And again, very dicey language that he's using here. Wrong for who? Wrong for the men? That were wrong for who? Wrong based on what? And here's where I agree with Marx, right? Here's where I believe that Marx comes in. Remember Siddhartha Gautama's childhood, Remember his own fabricated makeup and place him in that and recognize where his blind spots were. And if you can't, that's cool, but I can. And maybe you'll be like, no, they weren't blind spots. He talked about that. He can't talk about it because he's never experienced it or lived it. So here's where it all breaks down. And I would argue if you really are practicing Buddhism, then you should lean in to these paradoxes because they're everywhere. And I would bet that they're everywhere in most religions. I would just want to keep coming back to the book. What does the book say? The book that was written by man, and then try to square it with, anyway, blah, blah, blah. Let's get back to it. Also, although the suttas don't mention this point, the practice of right speech, I already did that, blah, 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 blah. The practice of applying the 3 tests for right speech to your own speech, that it be true, beneficial, and timely, and we talked about this a couple episodes ago, prepares you for applying the same tests to your thoughts as you try to bring the mind to concentration. Very true, very true. In this way, right speech provides excellent preparation in exercising the sort of control over verbal fabrication that will be necessary to bring the mind into jhana. Gaining control over your mouth gives you practice in gaining control over the chatter in your mind. And again, this is something that you can test out for yourself. I think if you're practicing meditation, then you definitely have already seen this for yourself. I mean, I would argue, and I think most Buddhists would, okay, people who are following this particular approach would say that, a few minutes a day is probably not going to cut it. It's not, no, let me take that. It's absolutely not going to cut it. If you're kind of getting into what he's describing here, you're talking about much, much, much longer sits where you actually do kind of get, it'll feel like a grapple. It'll feel like you're grappling with your mind. It'll feel like it's a fight. Notice I keep saying it feels like, because that's all that it is. It is a feeling, which you're probably not going to have access to if you're just sitting you're not going to have access to if you're just sitting a few minutes a day. And that's not a problem. Maybe you don't want to practice this. Maybe you don't want to face your own brain squarely and then break your mind, right? And again, I don't know if this happens again, you can listen to my own past and the things I've experienced, the things I continue to experience, blah, 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 blah. But also, I want to push back here on this idea of jhana because the reason why Buddha departed from Hinduism, my understanding, is this attachment to jhanic states to begin with. That in and of itself is egoic clinging. It's egoic producing. It feeds the monster. I'm not interested in that. All right, so I'm going to keep on going. At the same time, the act of holding to right speech and right action helps to exercise the 3 qualities that have to function in right mindfulness: alertness, and ardency. To maintain right speech and right action at all times, you have to be mindful of, i.e. to hold in mind, the principles of what counts as right speech and right action. You have to be alert to make sure that your speech and actions are actually in line with those principles, and you have to be ardent in making the effort to stick with right speech and right action and to avoid their wrong counterparts. This is what MN 117 Sutta 48 means when it says that right mindfulness and right effort, which is equivalent to ardency, circle around right speech and right action. This is also why SN 47:16 notes that virtue is one of the requisites for right mindfulness. In addition to exercising the qualities of mind needed for concentration, the practice of right speech and right action also exercises your discernment. And so we got some bullet points here that Ṭhānissaro Bhikkhu is providing, and so these must be the list of what it exercises. To begin with, it sensitizes you to your intentions in action. In this way, it takes the general principle of mundane right action, that actions are rooted in intention, and makes it more detailed and specific. You begin to see for yourself that honesty inside and out is necessary for genuine insight into your motives and intentions to arise. And I think in a way, I just kind of talked about that, that as you continue to practice, you see your role, you see the dance, you see your participation in the dance. It rises to the surface. Our motives, our intentions, they rise up. So second bullet point. In a similar vein, it gives you exercise in learning how to develop the strategic wisdom needed to talk yourself into avoiding wrong speech and wrong action, even when you want to engage in such things. and to talk yourself into engaging in right speech and right action, even when you don't want to. And that's Sutta 204. We will treat this issue in more detail under right effort, but it's important to realize that it's a matter of right view and right resolve as well. And again, I just reiterate that this might be very, very easy for some. This has been, may or may not continue to be, who the hell knows, something that I get to work with on the regular, the strategic wisdom needed to talk yourself into avoiding wrong speech. And again, I want to reiterate that you yourself get very clear about what that right and wrong speech is and what timely means. And this, I think, is where a teacher can come in very, very handily, but it's also where I would say, and where the Buddha also said, be very careful about who that teacher is. Because teachers are humans with egos. So just be careful, and examine your own heart, examine your own mind. When I speak out, when I did a lot of speaking and posting and writing about Epstein when the Epstein files first broke, and I used profanity and I used sharp language. And if someone were to say to me, that was wrong speech, I'd say, absolutely not. Not from where I'm standing. That was right speech because it was timely speech and it needed to be said. No more bystander effect. No more. So, again, I realize there's a lot of different branches of Buddhism that came much later after they've passed through other cultures. And I'm not a scholar, so, but I would take any teacher at all to task, because I know what they would say to me. But you can feel your own ego rising, blah, 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 blah. And I'd be like, absolutely, I most definitely do. Thank God that there are scrappy fighters in the world. Thank God. I always laugh at the people that are really into the law of attraction. I'm just going to focus on what makes me feel good. Oh, and the people that don't feel good, well, that's because they aren't projecting an energetic field that lines up with it. I have no response for that. I have no response for that. I'm just going to keep on doing this. I'm going to keep on reading. I decide when it's timely. Yeah. And I don't take that lightly. I bring in my full practice. Yeah. And other people that I trust. There's this belief in Western Buddhism and mindfulness cultures that everything needs to happen in a community. That's actually not really Buddhist. That happened later in different branches of Buddhism, but that's actually not like what the Buddha taught. So sit on the mat. Don't blow smoke up your own ass. And yes, the Buddha did say that wise companionship, using your discernment to find compadres to go through life with in this practice is key, is critical. A Sangha is not critical. That is not what the Buddha taught. I'm sorry. Go ahead and fact check me. And if you find a source that says I'm wrong, then here's my question to you. Who said that? You sure that isn't something that happened thousands of years later or hundreds of years later in a totally different culture that never had actual exposure to Buddhism firsthand? You sure it's not some cultural kind of hand down? Again, let's keep going. Third, the practice of right speech and right action also exercises your ingenuity in using discernment in the areas where the principles of right speech allow for exceptions, i.e. in the areas of divisive tale-bearing, harsh speech, and idle chatter, and in the areas such as the principle of truthfulness and all the areas of right action where no exceptions are allowed. And again, this was brought up in previous chapters and previous episodes where he really gets into the weeds about what right speech is, what wrong speech is, and some of the things that he recommends that we use as mechanisms to kind of, I guess, apprehend our own motivations for why we're saying what we're saying, we're doing what we're doing, we're presenting as we're presenting. Again, this to me is always where a teacher, and I don't like the word teacher. I've been a teacher for 20 years and I don't like the word teacher. This is where there are people who I trust that have what I want. I don't like that either, but they are behaving in such a way that I see the practice in them. It cultivates in me trust because I see that they're walking the walk. better than I do, but there's plenty of people, there's plenty of wisdom out there that I use to help me and to help me continue to engage with the world in an open-hearted and loving way. So there you go. In the areas where exceptions are allowed, you have to be honest with yourself about your motivations for taking advantage of the exceptions. And I find this is very true for me. You know, when I start to notice that I'm getting angry, what's happening is it's really just me being an egomaniac. You know, my sense of, in that moment, my sense of justice, my sense of what's right and wrong, my sense of what I value is being pricked. It's being confronted. It's being confronted. But here's how I like to think of it. I'm taking affront to it. My I is feeling offended by it. So this kind of gets back to my whole dispute with the Buddha here in today's readings, which is you have to be honest with yourself about your motivations for taking exception. I believe that I 100% know what my motivations are for taking advantage of the exceptions. And as soon as I notice that I'm no longer in that mind state, I stop. To stand up for women and girls, to speak out against pedophilia, sex trafficking. I don't care what you think, Buddha. I mean, in other words, if we were sitting across from each other and you were to suggest to me, well, are you sure you're being honest with yourself about your motivations? Well, what in you made you ask that question? Are you sure you should have asked it? I mean, how far do you want to go with this? You know, so to a certain degree here, you just can't outsource it anymore. I think what you can do is you can read, you can practice, you can devote to the practice, you can, it comes out of the practice. And then from there, in Buddhism, it's kind of on you to get your shit together, you know? Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna take a little bit of a break because I just need to take a break from talking for a moment to edit some of this, and then I'll be back to keep on going. All right, so we're getting into transcendent virtue. MN78, Sutta 201, provides a definition of the transcendent level for all the virtue factors of the path, when it defines what it means to be beyond skillful habits. Habit here being a translation of the word siya, and I don't know if it's sila or siya, which can also mean virtue or precept. And the precepts are pretty huge in Theravāda tradition. Instead of dropping the precepts, a person beyond skillful habits is virtuous, silavant, but is not made of virtue. Silamaya. Ooh, I cannot wait to get some help with this. Silamaya, and I'm so sorry if I destroyed that. My apologies. What this means is that on reaching this stage of the practice, which apparently follows the first stage of awakening, your behavior stays in line with the principles of right speech, right action, and right livelihood, but you do not define yourself around your virtue, and you neither exalt yourself for being virtuous, nor do you disparage others for not. In this way, you avoid the dangers that come from clinging to habits and practices, at the same time enjoying the benefits that come from skillful words and deeds. And to my view, this is how I know that I'm absolutely had not reached the first stage of awakening. I definitely don't exalt myself for being virtuous. I don't find myself to be particularly, I don't know if the word virtuous would apply to me. I honestly don't know. That's not a word that I think applies. I don't know. But disparaging others for not, there is no question that I struggle with that. Right, Epstein? So, yeah. Clearly, I have not reached the first stage of awakening. I'll just say that according to, what the Buddha is talking about here. It's why I need to meditate every day, because it is why I sit every day, because how can I put this? I'm going to take it back to Epstein, okay, which is an ongoing story. It continues to evolve, and I'm so glad that it's still making the news cycle. I'm so grateful that it's making the news cycle and it's staying in the news cycle. But when that story first broke, I don't mean the original story, like way back in, 2005 or 6 or whatever it was. I don't remember when he went to, the Florida thing. But I mean, this year and a little bit of last, when all of that broke, I can't even begin to describe the rage that I felt. It was pretty profound. And I have some episodes here where I talked about it, and I did, I brought my full self, as they say. So this notion right here that I could look at that behavior, especially given where I come from and what happened to me when I was a little kid, and to, wait a minute, let me find it. And to not disparage that, him for not having virtue. Impossible, just impossible. Certainly impossible in this lifetime. Yeah, if these are the indicators for awakening, ain't happening in this lifetime. Because I've already experienced all kinds of incredible things on mushrooms and acid when I was much younger, and I've been meditating for 25 years. So all I can say is probably not in this lifetime. But boy, to imagine being in this place, I've met people like this, and I've had periods of this myself, but I would say by and large, I can't imagine what it would be like to be like this all of the time. Unless I only sought after things that made me feel good. You know what I mean? Like, it's such a slippery slope. Like I think about the sense gates, right? So you go back earlier in the book, the intro is a great place to start for that, and just or look in the, just if you're looking at the virtual book, just type in sense gates or sense doors or whatever. I don't remember what the actual is in the canon, and here's another paradox, right? So we protect the sense gates, sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, and then that 6, which I think is content, I'm not a scholar. Please don't use me as a scholar on Buddhism. So we protect them because it does help us to be more virtuous. Part of why I was angry is because, one, I had been diddled with as a child by a grown-ass man. So that's one. And I remember it. And I remember other features of living on that quote-unquote commune in my young childhood that were the grounds for a lot of suffering. And I think the only reason why you would give people suffering a hall pass is because you've convinced yourself that they need to suffer to be what? These are all stories, by the way, stories that we tell ourselves, stories that we write down in books that humans write. So it's all framing. And I had also been watching, listening. If I was to completely protect my sense gates, then that easily puts me in the bystander effect, which I think has enabled horrible things to happen to suffering humans for time immemorial, because we look the other way. Religions can be another way to teach us how to look the other way. So it's another paradox. I don't really have anything else to say about that. Other than I ain't reached the first stage of awakening, clearly. Okay. All right, where did I leave off here? Right. In addition, you gain practice in becoming familiar with the state of mind that does not think in terms of I or me, thus preparing yourself to think more consistently in the terms that characterize right view on the transcendent level. In that regard, I very much can identify with that. Ooh, I may or may not hold for plane here. And there it's kind of hard for me to describe how I feel about I, me, and mine. It's weird. I feel like I feel like it's, I honestly don't know how to describe it. I see it for what it is. I don't know what that means exactly, other than I see it for what it is. Sometimes I forget. Sometimes I choose to forget, I guess. Again, going back to what I said earlier, it's complicated. Yeah, I guess that's all I can say about that. It's for me, it's complicated. Some ancient commentators in non-Pali Indian Buddhist traditions maintain that because speech, action, and livelihood are not an issue when the mind is in meditation, the virtue factors of the path are not really involved as the mind approaches awakening. Thus, they argued that the path just prior to awakening has only 5 factors. However, they miss the fact that the transcendent levels of virtue are still present in the mind. And so the path factors at the threshold of awakening still number 8. And again, and this is a great way to leave this, because this is the end of Ṭhānissaro Bhikkhu's introduction to the readings on right speech. And then after that, right action. And again, I'm profoundly ignorant here, but there are some things that, I presume to know from people who who were scholars and monastics who taught me and a long time ago, and I forgot most of it, but I've got a brain, I have a memory, some would say I'm actually pretty intelligent. My understanding is that this is how they kind of split up. This was Siddhartha Gautama's bone of contention with Hinduism. This over kind of, to his view, a fascination with experiencing and transcending the jhana states. And this is why I get so, I've had a lot of incredible experiences in meditation, just incredible, and I find that some practices can kind of help me to experience that more. And I don't know what any of that is, I don't know what any of that is, but I try to be really careful with all of that. Again, boy, this just seems to be the episode of, hey, Buddha, let's go, motherfucker. This is going to piss off so many Buddhists. Nobody listens to this. If you're listening to this, I'm sorry, you're absolutely not nobody, and thank you, but come on, look at how many whatevers I have, like 1, and I don't even know, 6 people, 7 people. So I'm not fearful that I'm pissing anybody off here when I say that. So what are you, have you self-identified that you've transcended? I mean, that's just speaking of ego. I know people who are profoundly good at staying in their head, and the moment they touch into their body, they run for the hills. It reminds me, I like to play this video game Fallout, and it's like feels like such a departure, but it's, in my mind, it's not. And there's an enemy in the game that you have to defeat every once in a while when you're doing an event, and I think it's called the Blue Devil or something. And it's really funny because when you get close to this Blue Devil in the game, you're not doing anything with your controllers. Your avatar just runs away, and with a crazy emoji over your head, and that's just how it is. There's nothing you can do about it. And I remember the first thing I saw, the first time I engaged with that, and that actually happened to me, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like trying to work my controllers and nothing was happening. I was just running away in horror. I know lots and lots of people who behave that way when they get into their body for just like a second. And I would argue that's probably why a lot of people, they quote, can't meditate, unquote. So this whole idea of transcending, we do seem to have this fascination, don't we, with transcending our body. To me, it's just it is just the weirdest thing in the world, that anybody could talk about a philosophical, theological point of view that centers compassion, that doesn't radically involve the body. It's like, where's the hidden camera? Is that a joke? No, seriously, I mean, is that a joke? I find it odd. But we only have maybe 15 more minutes before the end of this episode, and I really do want to get into the readings a little bit here. So, yeah, again, I love that introduction. It challenged me big time. Ṭhānissaro is just the messenger, man. But yeah, like I said, that game you play, if you could invite 5 people to dinner, alive or dead, who would it be? I think it goes without saying who one of them would be. And we've already had, we're well into course 3, given the things that were coming up for me as I was reading. So let's get into the readings. And just a quick reminder, if you're following along in the book, top of page 290, if you downloaded the book, Right Speech, Sutta 165. And how is one made impure? In 4 ways by verbal action. There is the case where a certain person engages in false speech. When he has been called to a town meeting, a group meeting, a gathering of his relatives, his guild, or of the royalty, i.e. a royal court proceeding. If he is asked as a witness, "Come and tell, good man, what you know." If he doesn't know, he says, "I know." If he does know, he says, "I don't know." If he hasn't seen, he says, "I have seen." If he has seen, he says, "I haven't seen." Thus he consciously tells lies for his own sake, for the sake of another, or for the sake of a certain reward. He engages in divisive speech. What he has heard here, he tells there to break those people apart from these people here. What he has heard there, he tells here to break these people apart from those people there. Thus breaking apart those who are united and stirring up strife between those who have broken apart. He loves factionalism, delights in factionalism, enjoys factionalism, speaks things that create factionalism. He engages in harsh speech. He speaks words that are insolent, cutting, mean to others, reviling others, provoking anger, and destroying concentration. He engages in idle chatter. He speaks out of season, speaks what isn't factual, what isn't in accordance with the goal, the Dhamma, and the Vinaya, words that are not worth treasuring. This is how one is made impure in 4 ways by verbal action. And how is one made pure in 4 ways by verbal action? There is the case where a certain person, abandoning false speech, abstains from false speech. When he has been called to a town meeting, a group meeting, a gathering of his relatives, his guild, or of the royalty, if he is asked as a witness, "Come and tell, good man, what you know." If he doesn't know, he says, "I don't know." If he does know, he says, "I know." If he hasn't seen, he says, "I haven't seen." If he has seen, he says, "I have seen." Thus he doesn't consciously tell a lie for his own sake, for the sake of another, or for the sake of any reward. Abandoning false speech, he abstains from false speech. He speaks the truth, holds to the truth, is firm, reliable, no deceiver of the world. Abandoning divisive speech, he abstains from divisive speech. What he has heard here, he doesn't tell there to break those people apart from these people here. What he has heard there, he doesn't tell here to break these people apart from those people there. Thus reconciling those who have broken apart or cementing those who are united. He loves concord, delights in concord, enjoys concord, speaks things that create concord. Abandoning harsh speech, he abstains from harsh speech. He speaks words that are soothing to the ear, that are affectionate, that go to the heart, that are polite, appealing, and pleasing to people at large. Abandoning idle chatter, he abstains from idle chatter. He speaks in season, speaks what is based in fact, what is in accordance with the goal, the Dhamma, and the Vinaya. He speaks words worth treasuring, timely, reasonable, circumscribed, connected with the goal. This is how one is made pure in 4 ways by verbal action. And that comes from AN 10:165. And this is just so rich. Just incredibly rich. And again, I want to be really careful here because I've talked about this before. The word shame, the word shame is such a fraught word in America. I'll speak to my culture in an American culture. Wait, I shouldn't say that. Not American, because there's all kinds of cultures within America. In what do people call it? Weird? I don't know, whatever. I grew up in the West. I'm a woman. I'm a white woman in the West. And shame is kind of a charged word in our anthropological soup, if you will. So as I read this aloud to us, I see so clearly, like a mirror, where I fail here. I see where I did good, and I see where I want to do better. And what I want to say here about this too, I know I've told this story before, so stop me if you've heard this one. You can't. I can't even remember like who it was. Maybe it was Thich Nhat Hanh. My apologies. I don't know if I remember. I think it was Thich Nhat Hanh. When he was giving a talk in the United States years ago, this would have been like in the 80s or 90s. And I saw a video of it on YouTube, like back when YouTube first came on the scene. And there was somebody in the audience who was kind of off mic, no camera or anything. They were asking, and the camera just stayed on him. It was just kind of like a static shot on him. And so the guy that was passing around the mic had to kind of speak into the mic what the guy was asking. And it was funny because he had to keep repeating it. And I don't know what they were speaking again because I don't remember who it was, but it wasn't in English. But you could see this look of puzzlement on his face. Like he just looked so, it was just genuine. Like, and you could tell, even if he didn't speak the language, you could tell that he was like, what is it? What are you, what? And when I found out what it was, when we all got to hear what it was, oh man, obviously it stayed with me. I never forgot it. And it really spoke to the profundity of what dependent origination and fabrication really means in Buddhism. And I would imagine too, again, I'm very ignorant, but Buddhism comes out of the Vedas, and so much of this must come from that because that's how he grew up. But these are not things to produce, oh gosh. My understanding, even as I read this here, and I could easily see why someone would take such an offense to some of the language that might be used in early canonical texts. I have exposure to the Bible, not a ton, but I definitely, I've read some of it. I attempted to read all of it once, and it was, whew, boy, I know people who've done that, and wow, incredible. But I don't think it would be news to anybody that if you were to take that book at face value, there would be a lot to find affronting. I don't know how Christians deal with their book, or if they even agree upon what is affronting. Maybe what I find affronting, they don't find affronting, But what I can say here with this is, as I do practice this, and I also, and this is why I'm not a big fan of groups or communities, and the Buddha talked about this as well in the early texts. It's just a room full of people, and we know what happens in rooms full of people. Not all rooms full of people, but there is a built-in power dynamic in a group of people that will happen irrespective of your cognizant awareness. And so you just need to go in with your eyes open. That's really what the Buddha would say that constantly. Just see for yourself, use your own discernment, practice, use your own discernment when you're picking people to work with. You discern, you decide, pay attention. So I think that's why I want to keep the word shame out of it, because as I read this, I can see little spots where I contributed to. Or what's more common for me is to, I'm not looking at the words right now, but the last page where he's talking about I'm just going to put it in my own words, being unsatisfied, being angry even, being dismissive of, being any kind of not particularly kind feeling around people who are like this, I take it personally, personhood. But again, that's a slippery slope. And I think that's why the Buddha said, you really need to see for yourself, because, and maybe that's what the Buddha would say if we sat down for dinner, is, and you're right, or whatever, or wrong, whatever. But, he would say, yes, you do have to see for yourself. And he would also say, well, what is it producing? What's it producing in you? And then I would have to concede to the Buddha. I'd have to say, makes me angry, makes my heart hurt, makes me want it to be different, which makes my heart hurt, which makes me angry. And so then I have to negotiate that, because then there's different kinds of anger operating at once. The anger at how you really want to know what I think about religion? I think religion was made by man to control women. There you go. That's what I think about your religion. The Bible, which has over 40 authors, all of which are men. The Bible, which, and most books, and how they talk about women, how they describe women, ownership, property. They have their place, they have their role, dictated upon high. I think you made up your God, man, to control women. And do I think that there is a God, or some kind of, to my mind, there's just absolutely no question. I don't like the word God, though. That was not my experience. And it wasn't all pure light either. It was just everything. It was just everything. And I've had multiple experiences, and even as a child, I've had strange experiences that I can't account for. But yeah, I think religion really is it's a tool of control, which makes me sad. I don't know much about Christ, but the little that I know, he sounds a lot like the Buddha, which was happening about 500 years earlier in another part of the world. He was just this guy who had this experience and then went around teaching about it. Interesting. Yeah. I think it's interesting. I think we're seeing a lot of we're definitely seeing a lot of wrong speech right now. If we're using this as a yardstick to measure it. I'm not on social media. I never really have been. I'm on LinkedIn. Does that count? But, a large part of it for me always has been the whole, I've always taken protect the sense gates really, really seriously, and, I remember when all that stuff came out, I'm an older gal, I was already teaching college when, YouTube came out and Facebook and at the time Twitter and all the things. And I was very active on MySpace and very quickly came to see what it was doing to me, I guess. And it was pulling at something in me and I didn't like it. I didn't like that I could lose hours of time, and that freaked me out. Now it could be that it freaked me out because I'd had exposure to Buddhism and meditation, and I'm quite certain that probably had a huge role to play in why I never got on Twitter, or any of that stuff. I was on Facebook for like a second. Yeah, I did try, and I remain off of it, thinking about Instagram as a coach, but protecting the sense gates. Yeah, I think protecting the sense gates is more important than ever right now. And as I read this, I'm reminded that given my temperament presently, and for as long as I can remember, let's face it, it's more important than ever, I think, for me to, when I say protect my sense gates, by the way, I don't want to suggest that I just never, ever do anything socially. In truth, I am an incredible introvert. And so I enjoy being alone so much that sometimes I just forget, to socialize. But no, I do love to socialize. I don't like to be in large groups. It's very sensorily overwhelming for me, but I love to socialize. But lately I've been avoiding socializing because there seems to be so much of this, and I can feel a pull in me, and I know what my practice is, and I can feel the anger tapping into my past, what happened to me, and this is happening, and that's good, but that's bad, and then now I can feel the anger, now I can feel the words coming out, now I can feel the closing of and I realize that we're in a time right now where I am considered the enemy, that Buddhists would be considered the enemy because we don't want to stand up and yell. And I got nothing for you on that. Yeah, you're right. We're not gonna do that. But you don't have to worry because we're not very popular. I think we're like 1% of the fucking Western population. So don't worry about it. Stop trying to change us. We're not gonna change because we think we're doing it right, and we think you're doing it wrong. Uh-oh. See what we do? I'm saying that tongue in cheek, right? See what we do? I mean, it's just get out. You're on a sinking ship. All right. So I think that is a great place to stop. We are now officially in the readings that Ṭhānissaro Bhikkhu chose to present right speech to us in this beautiful, beautiful book, of which we are about, let's see, we are a little bit more than halfway through. Wow. So this is definitely going to be over 100 episodes by the time I'm all said and done. I want to reiterate that I'm not a scholar. I've never been ordained. I'm just a regular human person who is very earnest about Buddhism, just has had a lot of experiences personally that she can't fully understand, but that line up here. And I'm so much more interested in having discussions with people who don't need to flatten what I practice to be okay with it, because I don't feel any need to flatten what anybody else practices. What I feel the need to do is say, I don't know. I don't, and why does it matter so much? I guess if you really believe in God, it would matter to you. And perhaps it's really, really hard to imagine someone that just doesn't believe in your Christian or Muslim God, or even your Hindu God, or gods. I'm sorry. In my experience, it's just experience. And that's it. It's everything and it's nothing. It's like the shadow dancing on Plato's cave. It's just practice. Anywho, so when we pick up next time, we will get into the suttas in earnest around right speech. And I'm just going to scan ahead to see where we're going. Is he going to go into another? So we're going to be in right speech for a while with the suttas. Very exciting. Okay, because that's definitely my pain point. I know it is. I know it is. Okay. Yeah, so we'll be here for a while. And I'm looking forward to doing that with you. Thank you again for being here. I really appreciate it. Wherever you are, may you be happy, and may you be at peace, and may you be free from suffering and stress. See you later.